It was supposed to be a quick favor. Her car needed gas, and I offered to fill it up on my way to the hardware store. A simple, everyday gesture. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't anything other than a husband doing something small for his wife. Until I saw it. The velvet box was nestled awkwardly beneath a jacket in the back seat, its corners sticking out like a taunt. My first thought wasn't infidelity. It was confusion. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me? But why leave it here, half hidden under a jacket? Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the box and flipped it open. It was beautiful. A platinum necklace, delicate but bold enough to demand attention. Its centerpiece was an intricate cluster of diamonds, the kind of piece that whispered elegance and screamed expensive. But the first question that hit me wasn't about the price. It was why. She wasn't one for flashy jewelry. Birthdays, anniversaries, even Christmas, she always leaned toward practicality. So why this? And why now? By the time I got home, the box was back where I found it, but my mind was racing. I couldn't just let it go. As she walked into the kitchen that evening, I tried to sound casual. "Hey, I found a little something in your car today." Her head snapped up. "What?" "The necklace," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's gorgeous." "What's the occasion?" "Oh," she said too quickly, her laugh forced. "That? I bought it for myself. Just felt like treating myself, you know?" I wanted to believe her. But her tone, the way her voice climbed half an octave, the way she fiddled with her sleeve, set off every alarm in my brain. "Looks expensive," I said. "It's not," she said a little too fast. "I got a good deal. Nothing crazy." The conversation ended there, but the doubt had already planted itself, deep and unshakable. Something was off. Later that night, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. Her reaction, her voice, the way she didn't meet my eyes. I didn't know it then, but that necklace was the thread that would unravel everything. I wanted to let it go. Really, I did. Trust isn't just the cornerstone of a relationship. It's the whole damn foundation. And yet, I felt like I was standing on sand. For days, I tried to ignore the itch. She acted normal, even affectionate. Maybe I was overthinking it. But late at night, lying next to her in the dark, I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she told me the necklace was just a treat. I could have left it at that. I should have. But the next clue came without me even looking for it. Her purse was sitting on the counter one afternoon while she was showering. I was tidying up the kitchen, another routine moment that turned into something far more sinister. I picked up her bag to move it, but it tilted slightly, and a receipt slid halfway out of the side pocket. I froze. The part of me that still wanted to believe her hesitated. I didn't want to find anything. I didn't want to confirm the nagging thoughts gnawing at the edges of my mind. But that other part, the one that felt the sting of her deflection the night I mentioned the necklace, reached for it anyway. The receipt was crisp, like it hadn't been there long. It bore the name of an upscale jewelry store, the same name etched onto the velvet box in her car. But that wasn't the detail that made my stomach drop. Under purchaser, it didn't say her name. It said Evan Walker. Who the hell was Evan Walker? My knees felt weak as I leaned against the counter. My hands shook, and I stared at the receipt like it might suddenly rewrite itself. Tell me this was all a misunderstanding. But there it was, undeniable. I shoved the receipt back into her purse just as I heard the water shut off. My mind raced. I wanted to storm into the bathroom, demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I'd hear. Maybe it was the tiny, pathetic voice whispering, "What if you're wrong?" When she came downstairs, towel drying her hair, I forced a smile. I asked her about her day. I played the part of a doting husband, even though my insides felt like they were boiling. But later, when she kissed me goodnight, I barely felt it. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate at work. The name Evan Walker haunted me. Who was he? A coworker? A friend? A stranger who happened to buy her something. Because what? Because he was kind? Generous? No. There was no innocent explanation for this. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I needed to know more. That evening, as she settled on the couch to scroll through her phone, I sat in the kitchen, staring at my laptop. Typing his name into social media felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but I hit enter anyway. Dozens of Evan Walkers popped up, but it didn't take long to find the right one. His profile picture showed a well-dressed man in his mid-40s, smiling with his arm around a woman. His wife, judging by her tag name, Jenna Walker. Scrolling through his page, I saw the life of a man who seemed worlds away from me. Business trips, expensive cars, fancy dinners. His posts were polished, curated. Perfect. But there was something off about his perfection, just like there was something off about her smile when she said she bought that necklace herself. I stared at his wife's face in the photos, wondering if she knew. Wondering if she had ever seen the cracks in her own foundation. I didn't message him. Not yet. But I couldn't stop myself from clicking on Jenna's profile. When I finally closed the laptop, my stomach churned with unease. For the first time since I found the necklace, I wasn't just suspicious. I was angry. The weight of betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in slowly, until you're drowning in a sea of questions with no shore in sight. That night, after discovering Evan Walker and his perfect little life, I felt the full force of that undertow. The bed we shared suddenly felt too small, too cold. I lay next to her, listening to her even breathing, and felt like I didn't know the person beside me. What is she dreaming about? I wondered. Me? Him? The questions grew louder. How long had this been going on? Was it physical, emotional, or both? Had she ever thought about stopping? About confessing? Every time I thought about the necklace, about his name on that receipt, a fresh wave of rage hit me. But there was something deeper than the anger, an ache so profound it felt like it might split me in two. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted to know how she could do this to us. The next day, I couldn't bear to look at her. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, and I felt my chest tighten as the door shut behind her. I sat there in the silence, staring at the place where she had just stood, feeling the cracks in my trust deepen. I needed clarity, something solid to stand on. So I did something I swore I'd never do. Her laptop was on the dining table. Her password burned into my memory from 1,000 mundane logins. I hesitated, my hands trembling over the keys. But when you're standing in the rubble of your marriage, morals start to feel like a luxury. I opened her email. At first, it was all work correspondence and junk promotions. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought maybe I'd find nothing. But then I saw it, a thread marked personal with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Last weekend was perfect. It was from Evan. The emails were everything I didn't want to see, written in a language that felt too intimate, too familiar. He called her beautiful. He reminisced about the hotel room they'd shared, the way she laughed at his jokes over wine, and how he couldn't wait to see her again. I scrolled back through weeks of messages, each one like a knife to the gut. She'd written back just as enthusiastically, detailing the rush of sneaking around, the thrill of feeling alive again. Alive. That word stuck with me. She was telling another man he made her feel alive, while I sat here, day after day, trying to build a life for us. The betrayal wasn't just in what she'd done, but in what she'd stolen from me. My trust, my peace, my sense of security. I didn't know how long I sat there, reading and rereading the words she had written. At some point, my hands went numb. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't stay in the house. I drove without a destination, the road stretching out endlessly before me. My thoughts raced, cycling through disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. I replayed every moment of the last year, trying to pinpoint when we had started to drift. Had I missed the signs? Was I not enough for her? Was there something broken in me that pushed her into his arms? But then, the anger flared again. No, this wasn't my fault. Marriage isn't perfect, but it's built on the promise that no matter how hard things get, you don't turn to someone else. By the time I parked in a random lot, I'd made a decision. I couldn't confront her without more information. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. And if Evan's wife, Jenna, didn't know, she deserved to. I wasn't ready to make my move yet. But one thing was clear. The truth would come out. One way or another. I couldn't unsee the emails. Each word, each punctuation mark was etched into my mind like a scar. Beautiful. Thrilling. Alive. Those words replayed in my head with a venomous persistence that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. That evening, I sat across from her at dinner, watching her laugh at a story she told about a coworker. She didn't seem nervous, didn't falter in her movements. She passed me the breadbasket like it was any other Thursday night. But it wasn't. Not for me. I studied her face, searching for cracks. Did she feel guilty? Did she suspect I knew? Or had the lies become so effortless that this double life felt like second nature? For a brief, bitter moment, I was impressed. How did she juggle the weight of this deception? How could she look at me, kiss me goodnight, and still have room in her heart, or whatever was left of it, for someone else? When she went to bed, I stayed behind in the kitchen, staring into the glow of my phone. The screen blurred as I thought about the web she'd spun, the memories she'd tainted, the vacations we'd taken, the nights we spent dreaming about our future. They were all poisoned now, retroactively stained by her betrayal. I opened Facebook. Jenna Walker's profile was still there. Her face, smiling alongside Evan and their 2 children, stared back at me like a cruel joke. What would she think if she knew? Would it shatter her world the way mine was crumbling? I tapped out a message, but deleted it 3 times before I could send it. What if I was wrong? What if this was all some awful misunderstanding? No, I wasn't wrong. The emails didn't lie. The necklace didn't lie. The receipt didn't lie. By the next morning, the tightness in my chest had turned into a dull ache that followed me everywhere. At work, I couldn't focus. My co-workers' voices sounded distant, like I was underwater. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking through a life that wasn't mine anymore. I kept thinking about temptation. It wasn't just hers. I felt it too, this gnawing desire to retaliate, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But what would that accomplish? Would it fix the hole she'd torn through my trust? Would it make me feel whole again? Probably not. But damn, it would feel good to stop being the only one in pain. That evening, I sent Jenna the message. Hi Jenna, I'm sorry to contact you like this, but I think your husband and my wife are involved in something inappropriate. I have some proof and thought you might want to know. I attached a photo of the receipt. The moment I hit send, my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might wake the neighbors. A part of me hoped she wouldn't reply, that this could stay between me and my wife, some private hell I could navigate alone. But Jenna replied within the hour. Can we talk? Her number followed, and I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the call button. I couldn't back out now. I dialed. Hello? Her voice was soft, shaky, like she already knew. Jenna, I said, my voice just as uncertain. This is hard. I don't even know where to start. Just tell me, she whispered. I told her everything. The necklace, the receipt, the emails. She stayed silent, but I could hear her breathing, each inhale shaky, like she was holding back tears. I knew something was wrong, she finally said. He's been distant. Late nights, work trips, her voice broke. I just didn't want to believe it. Neither did I. But here we were, 2 strangers bound together by the same betrayal. We need to confront them, she said, her tone sharpening. Together. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of clarity. Yes, together. If they were bold enough to destroy 2 marriages, they could face the consequences in the harsh light of day. It was time to pull the curtain back. The plan we devised felt almost cinematic. 2 betrayed spouses, uniting to confront their partners in a single, calculated blow. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and the stakes were everything. For days, Jenna and I texted back and forth, piecing together their affair with a grim determination. She forwarded me screenshots of Evan's text messages, riddled with endearments and promises. I shared the emails I'd found, her replies brimming with affection that had been absent from our marriage for months. Each revelation hit like a punch to the gut. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a relationship, one built on lies and stolen moments. And yet, despite the anger, a darker thought lingered in the back of my mind. Did I drive her to this? It was impossible not to second-guess myself. I replayed every argument, every moment I'd been too tired, distracted, or distant. Had I made her feel unseen? Had I let the spark between us die? But every time guilt threatened to take hold, I reminded myself, no one forced her to do this. She chose to betray me. She chose him. It wasn't my job to fix her mistakes. It was my job to decide what came next. Jenna and I agreed to meet in person a few days before the confrontation. It felt surreal, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, exchanging grim nods like comrades before a battle. She was striking, sharp eyes, a steady gaze, but the strain showed in the way she fidgeted with her coffee cup. "So," she began, "what do we want out of this?" Her question hung in the air. Revenge? Closure? Justice? I didn't know. I only knew I couldn't keep living like this, pretending everything was fine. "I want them to see what they've done," I said finally. "No excuses, no deflección. Just the truth." Jenna nodded. "Same. And I want him to feel even a fraction of the pain he's put me through." There was no malice in her voice, only a quiet resolve. The confrontation was set for Friday night. Jenna had found their next meeting spot, a trendy little restaurant halfway between the city and the suburb where Evan and I lived. She made the reservation in her name, ensuring that our timing would be perfect. My wife was easy to convince. "I thought we could go out Friday," I said, feigning nonchalance. "Been a while since we had a nice date night." Her smile faltered for a split second. "Friday? So, okay. Sounds nice." She didn't suspect a thing. The night came quickly, the hours crawling by with agonizing slowness. I dressed carefully, trying to mask the storm raging inside me. When she came downstairs, she looked stunning in a new dress I didn't recognize. For a moment, the sight of her hit me with a pang of longing. I wanted to believe in the woman I thought I'd married. But that woman didn't exist. When we arrived at the restaurant, Jenna was already waiting outside. She caught my eye and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of what we were about to do. "Who's that?" my wife asked, her brow furrowing. Before I could answer, Jenna stepped forward. "Hi," she said, her voice cold but calm. "I think you know my husband, Evan." My wife's face went pale as realization dawned. What's going on?" she stammered, her eyes darting between us. We didn't give her time to formulate a lie. Jenna and I pushed open the door, walking straight to the booth where Evan sat. He was mid-sip of a glass of wine when he saw us. His expression twisted into something between shock and dread. "Evan," Jenna said, her voice low and steady. "Surprise." I turned to my wife. "Go ahead," I said, my voice trembling with restrained anger. "Explain yourself." But she didn't say a word. She just stared at me, wide-eyed and silent, as if her guilt had stolen her voice. And for once, I didn't feel the silence. The silence was deafening. My wife sat frozen, her mouth opening and closing as if words might materialize out of thin air. Across the table, Evan looked just as shell-shocked, his glass of wine forgotten in his hand. I wanted to yell, to rage, to demand answers. But instead, I stood there, staring at her as a lifetime of shared moments flashed through my mind. The day we met, the nervous smile she gave me on our first date, the quiet promises we'd whispered to each other on our wedding night. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone naive enough to believe love could protect against betrayal. "Nothing to say?" I asked finally, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. "Let me help you out," I continued, pulling the jewelry receipt from my pocket and slapping it onto the table in front of her. "Remember this? The one with his name on it?" Evan flinched, his eyes darting to Jenna, who stood beside me with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Jenna, let me Don't." She cut him off, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Just don't." For a moment, the two of them exchanged a look, some unspoken plea passing between them, and it made me sick. Even here, caught red-handed, they had the nerve to cling to each other. "How long?" I asked, staring directly at my wife. Her eyes flickered with panic. How long?" I repeated, my voice rising. She swallowed hard, her hands twisting together in her lap. "A few months," she whispered. I laughed, bitter and hollow. "A few months? That's it?" All the late nights, the lies, the necklace. A few months was enough to throw it all away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. Those words, that pathetic, cliched excuse. It was like gasoline on an already raging fire. Didn't mean for it to happen? I hissed. You didn't accidentally book hotel rooms or write emails about how alive he makes you feel. Those weren't mistakes, they were choices. Evan tried to interject again, but Jenna silenced him with a glare that could have cut glass. Don't even think about speaking, she said. You've done enough. The restaurant was deadly quiet now, every other table watching the scene unfold like a live soap opera. But I didn't care. Let them see. Let them judge. I turned back to my wife. You know, I wasn't going to do this here, I said, pulling a second envelope from my pocket. But since we're airing everything out, I dropped it onto the table in front of her. She stared at it, her face crumpling as realization dawned. Divorce papers, I said. Signed, dated, and ready to go. All they need is your signature. Her breath hitched. Please, let's talk about this. No, I snapped, cutting her off. We're done talking. You made that decision the moment you brought someone else into our marriage. For the first time, she looked genuinely desperate, her hands reaching across the table toward me. But I stepped back, out of her reach. You should consider yourself lucky, I said, my voice steady now, the anger replaced by a hollow finality. Because if Jenna hadn't wanted to confront you two together, I might have just packed my things and left without a word. You deserve that, by the way. She flinched like I'd struck her, but I didn't care. This was the truth, and it needed to be said. Beside me, Jenna gave Evan one last, scathing look before she turned to me. I think we're done here, she said quietly. I nodded. Together, we walked out of the restaurant, leaving them behind in a silence that felt heavier than any words could have been. As the cold night air hit my face, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, grief, relief. It was all tangled together, messy and raw. But one thing was clear. I was done being the fool in someone else's game. The drive home was silent. Jenna and I hadn't exchanged more than a few words after leaving the restaurant. There wasn't much left to say. Everything we needed to express had been laid bare inside that building, and now it was just the aftermath. As I pulled into my driveway, the quiet of the night pressed down on me. My wife's car wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. She was still back at the restaurant, probably trying to pick up the shattered pieces of whatever fantasy world she and Evan had built together. Part of me wanted her to come home, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to see the look on her face one last time. I needed her to see the destruction she'd caused up close and feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But instead, the house was dark and empty. I sat in the living room for hours, staring at nothing. My mind was a hurricane of emotions, each thought colliding with the next in a chaotic storm. Anger, sadness, regret. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to punch a hole in the wall. But what good would that do? She wasn't here to see it. She wasn't here to feel it. Instead, I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my best friend, Matt. Matt didn't say much as I spilled everything. He just listened, letting me vent without interrupting. When I finally stopped, my voice hoarse, he sighed heavily. Man, I don't even know what to say, he admitted. That's brutal. But I'm glad you found out. You don't deserve that. His words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't cried since this whole thing began, but something about hearing those words, "You don't deserve that," broke something inside me. I didn't sob or wail, but the tears came anyway, slow and silent. Matt didn't make a big deal out of it. He just stayed on the line until I pulled myself together. Thanks, man, I said finally, wiping my face. Anytime, he said. And listen, don't let this define you, all right? She messed up. Not you. Don't forget that. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My body ached, my head throbbed, and the weight of what had happened was still there, heavy and suffocating. My wife hadn't come home. She texted once, "I need time to think. I'll stay at a friend's tonight." I didn't reply. What was there to say? Instead, I started packing. Not her things, mine. I didn't want to wait for the drama of dividing up the house or fighting over furniture. I just wanted out. As I stuffed clothes into a suitcase, I found a framed photo of us from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so carefree. I stared at it for a long time before shoving it face down into a drawer. That wasn't who we were anymore. Maybe it never had been. By the time she came back the following evening, the house looked emptier. I was sitting on the couch when she walked in, her eyes red and swollen. "I saw your text," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're leaving?" "I am," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I'm not going to stay here and pretend like this can be fixed. We both know it can't." She sat down across from me, wringing her hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her voice breaking. "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "I don't need to hear it. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." Her tears came then, streaming down her face in a way that might have once softened me. But I didn't feel pity anymore. I felt nothing. "I loved you," I said quietly, standing to grab my bag. "But you killed that, and I hope one day you understand what you've lost." I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Walking out the door wasn't the relief I thought it would be. The air was cold, biting against my skin, but the weight I carried inside was heavier than ever. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't as simple as packing a bag and leaving. The past wasn't something you could just shake off. It clung to you, a phantom that lingered in the quiet moments. As I loaded my suitcase into the car, I felt a strange hollowness settle in my chest. I'd dreamed of a life with her, kids, growing old together, a million little moments that made up a lifetime. And now, all of it was gone, shattered into pieces I didn't know how to pick up. But what gutted me the most wasn't what I'd lost. It was what I believed. I believed in her, in us, in the idea that love, no matter how flawed, could hold two people together. Clearly, I'd been wrong. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city blurring past me in a haze of street lights and shadows. Every song on the radio seemed to mock me, each lyric a reminder of what I didn't have anymore. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly above me, its letters flickering like a dying heartbeat. It wasn't home, but at least it was somewhere to sleep. The room was small, with outdated furniture and a musty smell that clung to the air. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. For the first time since I'd walked out, the silence hit me. No voices, no footsteps, no familiar hum of the life I'd shared with her. Just me alone with my thoughts. The questions came next. When did it start? What did he give her that I couldn't? Was it the excitement, the danger? Or was I just not enough? I hated that I cared. I hated that even now, after everything, I still wanted to understand her reasons. But the truth was I might never know. Maybe she wouldn't even know. Maybe the affair was just an escape, a way to run from something inside herself she didn't want to face. And that's what scared me the most, that it wasn't about me at all. That I'd been collateral damage in a war she was waging with herself. Around 2 a.m., I got a text. "I'm sorry." That was it. 2 words like a Band-Aid slapped onto a gaping wound. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. There were so many things I wanted to say, angry things, cruel things, questions she didn't deserve to have answered. But I didn't type anything. What was the point? No apology could fix this, and no explanation would make it hurt any less. I turned my phone off and threw it onto the nightstand. By the time morning came, something inside me had shifted. The ache was still there, but it felt different. Duller, maybe. I sat by the motel window, watching the sun rise over the horizon, its light cutting through the darkness. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I had now. And for the first time, I realized that was okay. I didn't need to know all the answers. I didn't need closure or revenge, or even an apology. What I needed was to start over. Not for her, not to prove anything to anyone, but for myself. And as the light filled the room, I made a promise to myself. I'd rebuild. One day, one step, one breath at a time. You don't realize how much someone is woven into your life until you start pulling them out thread by thread. Over the next few days, that's exactly what I did, untangling her from my existence. It was like bleeding out slowly, one small wound at a time. The first time I called my bank to separate our accounts, I stuttered over the words. as if saying it aloud made it more real. I need to remove my wife from this account, I said, the word wife sticking to my tongue like something foreign. Understood, the representative replied cheerfully, as if she hadn't just taken a blade to a piece of my life. Canceling joint subscriptions, changing emergency contacts, and updating passwords. All of it felt like chiseling away at a monument I'd spent years building. And every small task brought memories rushing back. The Netflix account reminded me of our lazy Sunday marathons. The gym membership was where we'd once promised to get in shape together, laughing at how uncoordinated we both were in yoga class. Every detail, no matter how mundane, was a reminder of the life we'd built and how easily it had crumbled. At night, the emptiness of the motel room felt unbearable. There was no one to share the silence with, no one to distract me from the noise in my head. I tried to watch TV, to scroll through my phone, but nothing held my attention. It wasn't the big moments I missed. It was the small ones. The way she used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder during movies. The way her laugh could fill a room. Even her annoying habit of stealing the blankets felt like something I'd never fully appreciate until it was gone. But then, inevitably, the anger would return. How could she throw it all away for him? 4 stolen kisses and whispered secrets that would never hold up in the real world? How dare she tell someone else the things she used to say to me? The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional. She had given him the parts of herself that used to be mine, and I hated her for it. But I hated myself more for still caring. One evening, after hours of trying to push the thoughts away, I finally caved. I opened my laptop and pulled up the emails again. It was masochistic, I knew that, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to understand what I was grieving. As I read through their exchanges, a strange thing happened. I felt nothing. The words that had once gutted me now felt hollow, almost laughable in their predictability. The way they flattered each other, the way they romanticized their stolen moments, it all felt cheap. I've never felt this way before. You make me feel alive. I wish I could give you more. They were playing pretend, both of them chasing a fantasy that would never survive the weight of real life. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity, not for her, but for them. Their affair wasn't some grand love story. It was an escape, a temporary high that would inevitably crash. And when it did, they'd both be left with the wreckage of their choices. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. It wasn't because the pain was gone, it wasn't. But something had shifted. I didn't need to keep reliving the betrayal. I didn't need to keep punishing myself by trying to understand it. The truth was, I might never know why she did what she did, but I didn't have to let it define me. As I drifted off, I thought about the life I wanted to build. Not the one I'd lost, but the one still waiting for me. And for the first time, I felt a sliver of hope. The first morning I woke up feeling something close to peace, it surprised me. It wasn't an epiphany or some grand revelation. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't press down on you, but settles gently, reminding you to breathe. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, sunlight streaming in through the thin curtains, and thought about how far I'd come in just a few weeks. Not far enough, maybe, but far enough to know that the worst was behind me. The pain wasn't gone. It might never completely leave, but it had dulled into something manageable, something I could carry without it crushing me. That day, I called my lawyer to finalize the divorce. The papers were already signed, but there were still loose ends to tie up: property, accounts, and the mountain of logistics that comes with unraveling a life you've spent years building together. The call was quick, clinical. I didn't feel much as I hung up, just a strange emptiness that wasn't as heavy as before. And then my phone buzzed. It was Jenna. Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? We kept in touch here and there since the confrontation. Neither of us had much to say about our exes anymore. It wasn't about them. It was about us, two people who had been blindsided and left to rebuild. I texted back, better than I thought I'd be. You. Her reply came quickly, saying, let's grab coffee sometime. For a moment I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure I was ready for any kind of connection, even a platonic one. But then I thought about how good it felt to talk to someone who understood, someone who didn't expect me to explain the unexplainable. Sure. I typed back. We met at a little cafe downtown, one I'd never been to before. Jenna was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and for the first time, I noticed how tired she looked, not just physically, but emotionally, like she'd been carrying a weight far heavier than mine. Hey, I said, sliding into the chair across from her. Hey, she replied. For a while we just talked. Not about them, about us. About how it felt to wake up every day and face the reality of what had happened. About the strange mix of relief and grief that came with letting go. I never thought I'd be here, she admitted, staring into her coffee. I thought we had a good marriage. Not perfect, but good. Turns out I didn't know him at all. I get it, I said. I keep wondering how I missed it. The signs, the shifts, everything. She looked up then, her eyes steady. You didn't miss it. They just got good at hiding it. I nodded, her words settling over me like a bomb. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't about what I'd done wrong, but about the choices they'd made. When we said goodbye, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I realized I wasn't alone. There was something healing in sharing the pain, in knowing that someone else understood exactly how it felt. Driving back to the motel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, yes, but there was something else there too. A flicker of determination, of resilience. For so long, I'd been stuck in the past, reliving every moment of betrayal. But now, for the first time, I was starting to see a future. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, bad days, and moments when the scars felt fresh again. But I'd survived this far, and that was enough to keep moving forward,